Hey, it's Paul Bannis of GreatDad.com here with my weekly series talking to modern dads about all types of subjects. And we're going to shift our focus kind of from younger dads or younger kids to a little bit older kids. And I've got a great guest today, Curtis Butler, who's a coach working with college grads. Welcome, Curtis.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really interested in this topic because I've got a daughter who just graduated who's looking for a job. I've got a son who's going to be a junior, and I'm facing these same things as the I don't know, the joys and the miseries of empty nesting, but also that desire to want to see your kids launch and launch effectively and make use of all the things that the opportunities that we've given them. So this is both a subject I think will be interesting to our listeners, but also to me personally. So I think you and I talked for just a second before we started. There are kids who get out of school and maybe all the news is about them is that they're super driven. They had, 2 or 3 internships during high school. They did Model UN. They did all kinds of incredible things. They've got a resume, killer resume. And let's not worry about those kids. Somehow those people seem to take care of themselves in my experience.
The Alex P. Keatons of the world.
But there are a lot of the other kids that are great people who are great students who got straight A's through college, but when they look at the work world, they're just like, oh, why do people even do this? Why do they go to an office during the day? Why do you have to put up with all that crap that I've watched you and mommy complain about for years? Give me a feeling of, is that what the bulk of your clients tend to be, are people who are kind of in that arena versus the ones who are super motivated?
I'm getting both.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the ideal client to work with is just someone who has an idea of what they want to do, even if they don't have an idea how to get there.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to misquote some philosopher or famous writer, but when someone was asked, why do you always tell the truth? The answer was, because it's the easiest story to tell.
True.
And that's how I feel about guidance for job searches and for defining that right career path for you. If you try to pursue what your parents think you should do or what an older classmate has succeeded in doing that doesn't necessarily come from you, it's not going to be that strong of a sales pitch. It's not going to be the best job search because it doesn't come from within and it doesn't necessarily match what you love and where you really want to go. Mm-hmm. Because that's truly the best story you can tell when it's genuine and it comes across so easily in an interview, especially on a screen. You can tell someone who's pitching someone else's story as opposed to their own.
Right. And when you get people who aren't even sure about that, because I think a lot, you've got a lot of kids who did more almost vocational technical school training in college. They went to schools like Northeastern is famous for really having a program that is right from the beginning. It's a career path.
Externships.
Right. Yeah. Or schools that really market themselves on preparing you every step of the way to get that job. But then you have a lot of kids who take majors that are perfectly good majors and require a lot of intellectual firepower, but they have things like gender studies or American studies or, the more
English or psychology.
Yeah, English, psychology, the old fashioned ones that we always knew of, and the new ones that aren't a clear path. What about those kids who don't even know what the translation of an English degree is other than to teach English?
Yes, that is where all of our conversations start, even with the hypermotivated,
mm-hmm.
because they don't always know what they want when you first start talking to them. And
mm-hmm.
then when you really dig in, like your parents aren't here, right? When you dig in to figure out not what you think your next job is, you want your next job to be. When you're hanging out with your friends and you say, yeah, when I'm 30, I'd really like to, can you finish that sentence for me? And then we go from there. If I said I really wanted to go in the NBA, that conversation would be a short one, right? Because I'm not tall enough or athletic enough. But it surprises many students, even those, as you said, they're already graduated. They have a liberal arts degree from a decent school. Now what? We just get right down to the bottom line is getting a job is all about what you can offer that particular employer. Believe it or not, the school you went to is not even the most important. What's the most important? The skills that you can demonstrate matters way more than this school you went to. Yes, an amazing school, top 20 school, your resume is going to drift to the top more often. But ultimately that person with just their degree and some so-so internships is not going to do as well. That hyper-motivated top 20 school person is not going to do as well as someone who has very defined skills that the hiring manager can say, that is something I need and don't need to teach you. So I'll give you a perfect example to your question about the students who don't know. So our first conversations are all about, let's find out.
Right.
Let's get there. And the second one is, I'll give you a very real-time example of something that every student and recent graduate can do. So there's a recent poll taken of employers. 70% of those employers said they expect college students to have formal ChatGPT prompt training.
Oh, wow.
Do you know how many are putting it on their resume? If you gave me 100 resumes today, you know how many would be on?
Well,
fewer than 5.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And the companies are saying it's almost as valuable, if not more valuable in certain tech jobs than the degree. So I tell every student and every parent, they have free online courses, OpenAI, Microsoft, universities, where you can take 10 hours, 20 hours, depending on how far you want to go, put it on your resume.
Yeah.
It shows them, oh, you are paying attention to what really matters today. And I have a real world experience right now with a young man I'm working with, doesn't have any work experience, who's the person you described. He was a college athlete and focused much more on sports. So now he's out. And I'm talking about these practical things you can do to improve your story and improve your resume. Yeah. He's already getting responses to that. People saying, I like that you have that.
Yeah. I have a theory, a hypothesis on that. Is I think that we're coming to the end of the age of the kind of the geek, the technical wizard type person, and we're moving into the area where humanities will be king, because the people who study humanities have more creative imagination. They're taught to be more creative imaginators, and that kind of training to write a prompt is just really totally in the wheelhouse of humanities graduate.
You hit the nail on the head. I was scaring a dad whose daughter is struggling a little bit and she's graduating soon. And I said, do you know who's best prepared to master these large language models and the prompt that's required to engage with them? Liberal arts majors. Yeah. Exactly what you just said. It's 100% true. Expansive thinking, creative thinking, right? I agree 100%. And this is what a 22-year-old might not think of. Like, yeah, you're scared, but let's see what you actually can offer. Let's see what skills you can bring to bear. And if there are some things you can do to boost your resume in the short term, let's do that.
So back in the day, people also used to use the Strong Campbell interest inventory or other tools like that. Are there tools like that today for kids to kind of map their interests and passions versus people who are happy in their careers to find out what would be good matches?
Yeah, there are several of those, and most of them now are available online. Yeah. Some you have to pay a nominal fee for, but I'm not as familiar with them. I have my own approach, which really gets into the one-to-one. Let's talk about you, not me. Yeah. Because I often get the question, I'd love to hear about your career. This isn't about me. This is 100% about you. And I'm bringing everything I know from 30 years in finance and hiring and interviewing to bear in this conversation. But I think that can be helpful. Sometimes they're so broad. Yeah. It says, it doesn't have me down as a leader. It thinks I'm more of this. Like, well, it depends on how you answer the questions. Sure. Right. So I think they can be useful because it gets people thinking about things. My father went into the law. This was a very long time ago because someone encouraged him to take one of those tests at the Stevens Institute in New Jersey. Mm. This is more than 50 years ago. And it said, you'd be a great lawyer. And he said, what's a lawyer do? They can certainly help. And I've thought about integrating some of that into my work, but as yet, it's really just that one-on-one focus. Yeah, I've just been interested in that as a tool to get kids to realize what careers are out there, because they may be only modeling themselves on the people they know personally or their mother and father know personally, and they don't know that there are these other things out there, names of which they may not have ever even thought of, or career paths that maybe they know of, but they, until somebody says, oh, real estate or, something like that, they haven't even thought of it as a possibility. And this is the conversation that I gradually want this to become more in the water at colleges and universities, that these are the conversations that the advisors have with them. Not just what major do you think you want? Here you go. Here's the course load. Goodbye. Yeah. Right. Let's have a conversation about you. Take the time, figure out what your passion, where your passions lie, where your skills lie, and let's find really the overlap, the nexus between those two, and identify a good path for you, rather than just taking as a fait accompli what they walk in with freshman year as an idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really at the heart of good coaching is trying to find those passions and the why and trying to develop that. So I imagine that in your career coaching, there's a lot of life coaching in there at the same time.
Yes, that's exactly right. And, I say there's no high school math that I can't teach my 50-year-old daughter who's very bright, but she has a tutor, because it's the parent-child relationship that has been established, and you establish certain habits and ways of engaging each other. It makes that really important, all important conversation about how to launch your career quite challenging for parents and kids. And it does pay, I think, to have an outside perspective and a third party kind of in the mix. And I have extremely candid conversations with these students, like, mom and dad aren't here. So let's talk about you and the way you think you want to. And mom and dad are doing an awesome job, by the way. They always have. They got you this far. They're giving you great advice. But their advice comes from a certain perspective. Here's a different perspective, right? And I'm going to see you with fresh eyes, as opposed to eyes that have been seeing you every day for 22 years.
Yeah. So how is the way the job market has changed also made this more complicated for this kind of kid who maybe needs coaching or needs to figure out what they even want to do in the world? And now they're faced with a job market that's fundamentally different than the one their parents are trying to, give advice on. Just the same way as college selection. I mean, we were totally outdated on this, 7, 8 years ago when we were looking at this. All of our ideas were really outdated. And the same thing is for the job search, I'm sure.
Right. Yes, I think that's true. I think the most challenging aspect of this is what we were referencing at the beginning. It's no longer a localized phenomenon. It's no longer your community, people people your parents know, and you walk in, you have a meeting with the branch manager who likes you and then kicks you up the ladder. The world doesn't work that way anymore. It's everybody gets the same email around the world when a job is posted. So it's all internet applications. It's very anonymous at the beginning. Very often, unfortunately, one of the application tracking systems, those ATSs, is doing the first cut of the 400 resumes. And I'm not a huge fan of those. I understand why they do what they do, but there's an awful lot of box ticking involved there. And you might miss out on exactly the right person for the job just because you're thinking in very specific terms about what fits, as opposed to more expansive terms about meeting individuals, right? So the job market has changed dramatically in the competitiveness of every position, unfortunately, every opening. And also the fact that it's not people we know anymore. And it's not people our parents know anymore. So it's completely anonymous from that perspective. That's why it's so important to put what I would say to that student who's already graduated, isn't sure what the path is, and I speak to plenty of these people today. The most important thing you can do is decide on what would make you happy and where do you think you can contribute. That's the most important conversation by far. And then let's create a candidate profile. Let's craft the story that gets you from where you are this minute to there, using only the truth, using only what you already have done and can do. And again, what I find so often is that, and it kind of pains me sometimes when a student will connect and they'll say, yeah, I just applied to 20 jobs in the past 2 weeks. And then I see the resume. It's like, this resume isn't going to get you those jobs.
Yeah.
Let's really boost that. Yes, formatting is an issue, right? There are lots of ways you can improve those things. There's stuff on the internet. It's not so much the formatting. Oh, that's really an issue. It's how does this tell a story that is interesting to me as the hiring manager and makes you stand out, makes you unique, right? Because if everybody's doing their resumes on ChatGPT, let's just say, aren't they all going to look the same and sound the same?
Yeah. But isn't there, so there's a part that is the design orientation, but then there's the resume, and I'm sure search engine optimization is the same as everything in the internet now is the use of keywords throughout and all the rest. And then overlaying that on top of that is a story. I mean, is it like that kind of?
You're very good at this, Paul. That's 100% what happens. So, and I tell them, look, let's fix your resume. Let's go with the 60%. Let's fix your resume. Let's fix the formatting. Let's move things around. Let's cut things down. Most of the time, there's 50% too much text. Let's fix that. Then literally this is for students out there, you can drop your resume into ChatGPT, even the free version, and have a conversation with ChatGPT. So essentially say, here's my resume. Please suggest possible edits that highlight the keywords that appear in the following job description, so that the keywords that in that job description appear on my resume, and improve the language so it sounds more professional. Literally, you have a conversation with it.
Yeah.
And by the way, please highlight the changes in bold.
Right.
5 seconds later, you get a document that's going to get you closer. So it's just as you said, it's hand in glove. It's a combination of there are technical tools you can use to enhance your resume, no question. But then it comes down to, I wrote this in a LinkedIn post, and I encourage any student who's interested in trying to find a job, they're struggling, they're looking for internships, jobs, or they're already graduated. There are plenty of people who are posting this stuff. I'm one of them on LinkedIn and now Instagram with job search tips. And I'm not just throwing stuff out there. This is not me using AI to create it. It is stuff that I've encountered in my decades of coaching and mentoring that really helps, that really works. So I think you're right. It's that combination of improving the technicals of your resume, make sure the keywords are there, make sure the formatting is attractive as opposed to off-putting, right? Cut down by 50% the number of words. New graduates should not really have more than 500 words on their resume.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes they really do. And then the final piece is, this is perhaps the most important message about the message you're sending when you submit that resume. Your resume is not meant to be a list or accounting of what you've done.
You mean a cover letter or
just your resume?
Yeah.
People think of a resume as, I'm supposed to put down everything on this document that I've done.
Right.
That's not a story. I need to understand, show me what you can do and what you've learned. Much more than, I was a clerk for this and I did that in 5 bullet points and getting coffee. Right. That's not what I want to see. What I want to see is, if you had an internship, great. But what did you learn in that internship? You could say deepened Microsoft Excel modeling skills. That's way more important than the place or the what. Right. Right. It's what you actually learned that you can come to this job with and that I don't have to teach you.
Well, that's one thing that hasn't changed.
That's right.
But I think just to highlight that first part, I think that one thing that scares people, older people, certainly when they go to look at those job descriptions, is they don't see that magic thing that you're just talking about, is using ChatGPT to rewrite your resume exactly for that job description. Because if you were to do that one by one on your own, it turns into, a half a day task for each one of those job requests. And I think that's a really great use of ChatGPT. It won't get you to 100%, but it may get you to 75, 80%, and then you make the tweaks to make it better.
And there's another little hack. Again, these are technical, but take a job description of a job you really want. As you said, Paul, you're right. Like, you don't want to do this with 20 things. I want people's job searches to be more focused than that, because the story that they tell is going to be more genuine if they're really interested, as opposed to, I just need a job. Right. Those interviews don't go very well. I would love for that to be true. I just need a job. I'm going to apply for all different kinds of things. You just don't tell the story of that consistency. Wait, what sector is this? Oh yeah, okay. I'm going to now tell a story that says I like that. But the other hack is, take a job description. And you could do this on your own. You don't need ChatGPT, but it's so easy. Copy and paste it into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, or not ChatGPT, I apologize. That we can do, but copy and paste it into what's called a word cloud generator. You literally dump that text into the word cloud generator and it comes up with a word cloud. And the biggest bolded words are the words that they're emphasizing most in the job description. And you want to make sure that you cover those in your resume. That's a lower intensity version of what we were just discussing. The word cloud generator is going to do very quickly what we would do intuitively. Wow, they're talking a lot about leadership. They're talking a lot about training. They're talking about all these skills. I should include those in my resume when I talk about my roles. Right. The word cloud generator will do the exact same thing for you like that. Right. So that's another hack.
So when you say that the old-fashioned, the local, the branch manager or the friend of dad or whatever, what about people who do have a fair number of contacts in the business world, kind of in that constellation? Are you saying that the contacts part doesn't help, or in general, most people don't have, it's not a linear thing. It's not a local, you know, you're not going to get a job at the local insurance company or whatever, that it's a lot more, has to be a broader geographical scope.
Yeah. And I think, so the broader geographical part is that these employers can take people from anywhere now because of the internet, and they're getting them
And working
from
online.
anywhere. That's right. But just finding them before, when there was no internet and you had to do everything by mail or by phone, you didn't find them all. You weren't contacting someone in Des Moines, right? It was really more local. But the question you're asking is a good one. And networking is still an enormous part of this.
Okay.
And that's something I cover a lot, which is what's the most effective way to do your networking? Because, you know, first of all, start with people you know. So to your point, absolutely your local community. Who do mom and dad know? Who comes over to the barbecue, right? That's in a field that interests me. I don't have to be certain.
Yeah.
And two things happen there. Number one is you might learn something about an industry, a job, a career that you're interested in. But number two, which gets back to the cultural changes that we've seen, you gain the practice that is necessary to engage with adults about professional things.
Mm-hmm.
And kids today have it hard. They do most of their communicating like this.
Yeah.
And COVID was really rough.
Yeah.
To this year's graduating seniors or high school seniors during COVID. So their whole entry into this more adult world was really stifled.
Yeah.
You know, there was a year and a half where we were not engaging people the way we normally do. A year and a half when you're only 20 is a lot.
Yeah.
So it's really challenging for them, and they have to pivot and start to practice engaging grown-ups on professional topics.
Are you able to convince kids that you talk to how important that is? Because I think a lot of them just say, oh, it's too anxiety producing, and I don't like spending time with your friends, and that's boring or whatever. And as a parent, you're sitting there thinking, well, for God's sake, that's the majority of
the job.
people. Yeah, the people who are going to be hiring are exactly like the people you don't want to spend time with. How do you convince them of how much they need to put themselves out there, given the fact that they have this history with COVID and having that a little bit stunted maturity due to that time period?
100%. So the ideal is that the parents help out a little bit here.
Yeah.
So I give the idea to the student or the mentee. And sometimes the parents are involved, right? Sometimes the parents are involved in paying for the coaching. So I have communication with them, and I will make suggestions. I had that conversation with one parent today who asked a very pointed question. And what I would say to the parents is we've had the discussion of how important it is to engage with grown-ups. Start with the familiar, start with people in your own community, then go on to alumni, right? Because they have some tie to you. They have a reason to respond. Yeah. Get as much practice as you can. And most students, I think, respond to this. The way parents can help is help create the situation where that can happen, right? Yeah. Invite so-and-so over, and then let the two of them talk for half an hour.
I hope they don't leave the room when the person comes over, right?
That's right. They disappear. I forgot. But I think, parents can help that way. It's not their job. And frankly, self-motivation and learning to take responsibility for these things is an important part of the job search. But, I have 2 daughters of my own. We can make it a little easier for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think about when your graduate, because I've got a graduate who just came home in May, and she's got 2 part-time jobs, which we could call internships, and they're directly related to what she's interested in. How do you feel about that versus that aren't real jobs? They're not real jobs, but getting that kind of experience. Or I guess on the flip side is saying, you graduated, you can take a couple of weeks off, but I want you to get a job even if it's at the 7-Eleven to keep yourself busy while you're working, because I think a lot of parents are fearful that they're going to have the, lying on the couch playing video games problem, and the time goes on, and it was just going to be the summer, and now we're into the holidays and that type of thing.
This is a conversation that I have as much as I can with parents, and you're covering very important topics here. But to answer your question as directly as I can, unless the money is the most critical, and in some cases it will be, right? If you graduated and it's been an incredible expense for the family, or the debt that you've taken on, and you need to just work, then work while you're looking for your dream job. You're going to have to find a way to do both.
Yeah.
But if that's not an absolute necessity, if you're fortunate enough that your family can support you for a little while you're taking part-time jobs that are in the direction you want to go in, there's no contest. If you can gain the experience. For the summer, I hired an apprentice who is really looking to build her resume and in digital marketing, which is what a small business owner definitely needs.
Yeah.
And so she's building skills. I'm doing coaching for her on the side, right? Helping her with her career. And it's not really a highly compensated job, but it's getting her the skills, which is really what is going to help her get the job. So if compensation is not the most important driver, getting the skills, what you're doing, what your daughter's doing, absolutely the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with a lot of people, I mean, she's lucky enough to have these part-time jobs that could be positioned as internships. But I think some parents are in the position of like, there isn't something that's applicable, but they want them to start to have that experience of now I'm working and maybe potentially even chipping in a little bit of money for food and groceries now they are now adults as a way to kind of formalize the fact that there is a transition happening. And I think that other ones of us are confused about what message that sends to, our beloved daughter and son who, we don't want to push them away or anything and perceive that as kind of being tough, kind of a tough love approach. And I think it's very jarring for parents, all these different transitions, but maybe this one is the worst because you're actively trying to push them out of the nest when you so desperately want to keep them there.
Right. And I know exactly what this feels like because I've spoken to many friends and there's two ways to go, right? Do you you're 22 now, you're an adult. I told you I would pay for college. Now you're on your own. Do you cut it off like that when they're floundering?
Yeah.
Right. Or do you say, I'm going to give you a window?
Yeah.
So do what you need to do over the next 6 months to land that career job. That's the most important part here, right? Yeah. Because if you just take a job for money, all too often it just turns into another job for money and then you can't get back.
Yeah.
That's that underemployment syndrome, which is unfortunately so prevalent these days. So, and every family has to grapple with this in their own way, because I know exactly as a parent what this feels like. I don't want to encourage that behavior. I don't want you to think that I'm carrying you, but for a little while, it might make sense if you can swing it. If you're convinced, then if you can work with your child on making sure that their job search is then their full-time job.
Yeah.
And there are resources that can help, there are coaches that can help, or just thinking of it as a full-time job. You get up in the morning, you make your bed, you take a shower, you shave, and you start looking for a job. You do the networking as much as possible. I talk a lot about what's the fastest way to get a networking response or the most likely way to get a networking response.
Right.
And there's two elements. Number one, be very clear about what you want. I'd love to have a phone call. Don't dance around. Nobody's got time for that. Number two, don't ask for much. You'd be amazed if I told you how many people still say, I'll be in town. Can we grab lunch? Like, no. If you had 15 minutes, you're an alumni. I saw your profile. I think you could be really helpful in providing advice for someone like me who's looking to enter the industry. Yeah. 15 minutes. So here's the trick. As the professional who sees that, I say, way to go. You respect my time. You understand this, that this is an exception I'm making. I'm taking time out from my job or my family, whatever. I'm much more likely to respond to that saying, yeah, sure. And someone who goes to the school I graduated from, 15 minutes, absolutely. Right. And it usually doesn't last 15 minutes. Right? Yeah, it's usually longer.
There's also something in there too, like I think we talk about informational interviews versus interviews for a job. And some kids go into that informational interview saying like, hey, I want to know what you do. I don't know what you do. And I did this. And what do you think? And that is a perfectly valid place for them to be. But would you agree that they need to figure out how to position that differently, where even if they don't know what they want, they come in with a series of questions, or they come in with a more of a framing so it looks like they're more in charge rather than they are like just day one of experimentation or discovery.
Yes. And that's a real turnoff, actually,
Yeah.
right? Just not being prepared. When I ask prospective clients, mentees, did you spend any time on my website? No.
Yeah.
Do you know what I offer? Do you know what I do? Not really. So-and-so just said I should call you. Right. So
Yeah,
you want to
mom
do
said
some
I
of
should
that.
call you.
Yeah. You want to do some of that. Yeah, she heard your presentation and said I should call you. You want to do that legwork to show that you are actually ready for the professional world.
Right.
So to get someone who's just, I don't really know, then why are you reaching out to me?
Right.
So you reached out to that person for a reason. So make sure that you go down the path of what that reason is. And you raise an excellent point about informational versus a formal interview for a job. They should be treated the same.
Okay.
Even though I'm a very informal person, you'll find that out when I get to know you or you get to know me. But you should hop on that call with me properly dressed, right? Having taken a shower, have a good Zoom presence, right? Sitting in front, not lying on your bed. You'd be astonished.
Really?
You would be shocked.
Oh.
People just totally relaxed. Like, yeah, Mr. Butler, they said you could help. Because it's really important practice for, as I was mentioning, engaging adults in a professional manner. You can't possibly have enough of those meetings and those calls.
Yeah.
I've been doing this, you and I have been doing this for a very long time. We still get better after all these years.
But here's a crux of a problem that I think that we older people don't well, there's an understanding, but there's not a respect for the younger generation's desire for authenticity. In their perspective is, no, I always wear my baseball cap backwards and I always wear this t-shirt and that's who I am and take it or leave it. And we're thinking, maybe we're not thinking suit and tie anymore, but we are thinking professional dress and professional background and
the word would be presentable.
Presentable, yes. And where is the mix of that? Because I think they just chafe at that idea. That's not me. I don't want to play by those rules.
Right. So the way I would approach that, and I get that completely, right?
Yeah.
I want your uniqueness, your personality to come through, right? I'm not a big fan of stifling diversity. I'm not a big fan of enforcing a particular model of a person, because now you don't get diverse views. And all of the research says what is common sense, which is diverse views create better outcomes.
Sure, yeah.
Right. So, and like I said, I'm learning so much from my apprentice who's in her early 20s.
Yeah.
Because she's teaching me a lot about the way her generation perceives business, perceives value,
right,
uses social media. So, I used to look upwards most of the time for where I learn, right? People have been around a lot longer than me. You could spare me decades. Help me out here.
Right.
I'm looking both directions now because young people are teaching me so much about how new generations view the world. So, but directly answering your question, if I'm paying you a $50,000 or $100,000 salary, I expect professionalism. Baseball hat backwards is not professional. It just isn't unless you're a baseball player.
But to be fair, there may be some cases, and maybe this comes back to doing your research and doing your due diligence so you know that person. Because if you are meeting with somebody who is dressed that way, he's got tattoos up their arms and is completely free spirit, and they're hiring you in a category where they look for that type of willingness to be different, that's okay. But if you're talking to mom and dad's friends who are 50 years old and they may be the person who tells the person who tells the person to have a real interview with you, you have to maybe position yourself differently. Wouldn't you agree?
And yes, that's a fair point, that I do have a generational perspective.
Right.
But I think the number of jobs still today may not be the case 10 years from now. But I would say I'd be comfortable saying most jobs today are on offer from people who have this more traditional thinking about what it means to have an interview, how one is expected to present themselves. So getting back to the surveys of the employers, there are a lot of these surveys out there, but this is how what the employers are saying. So you have young employers, old employers, right? All stripes, small companies, big companies. More than 35% of employers said that the college students they spoke to in their interview did not dress appropriately.
Wow.
So that's from the perspective of the people who are handing out the jobs, not Curtis Butler's own perspective, given his experience. This is what the employers are saying.
Right.
A shocking percentage actually invited a parent on the call.
That also is, yeah.
Right. So I want to help kids today because they didn't quite have a fair shake, because the culture has changed in ways that do not promote professionalism, right, in a way that's really important when you want to get that high paying job.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there are two more things I want to touch on. One is about how passive the whole job search can be, as well as what you were talking about a little bit before we started about preparing your maybe your college or your high school freshman, sophomore for it. Let's start with that. If you've got a slightly younger child now who's entering in high school, because you told me before we started that the preparation has fundamentally changed in terms of how you get those kids ready for the job search that's still 3 or 4 years away. They may have no idea what they want to do. They haven't gotten into college. They don't know what a major will be, anything like that, yet they still should be in that mode of 3 or 4 years in the future.
Yes. And what's interesting is when you talk to the high schoolers, or you talk to parents about talking to the high schoolers, it could easily create this fear of putting too much pressure on them when they're young. And my objective is actually literally the opposite. I want them to start thinking about things. They don't have to do these things right now, but I want them to start understanding the paths that get there, right? The name of my company is Guided Ascent Coaching. It envisions the job search, particularly for young people, kind of like an Everest expedition. And you can go for it on your own, but it does help to have a guide, right? If the weather turns bad, right, or the path isn't what you thought, we redirect, right? It does help to have a guide. But what I would say about the high school students and the parents of high school students is this: there's an entire industry focused on getting kids into college. But they're not focused on what those kids are going to do in college. And that's what I try to help with. First of all, I'm happy to meet with high school students. I actually offer service to help them create their first resume, to build a LinkedIn profile when you're in high school, and start practicing putting milestones in there when you're 17, 18 years old. So it becomes, you've done it your whole college career. You've done this 5 or 6 years by the time you graduate. You'll be better than me, right? So I like starting early, because early and that kind of preparation actually de-stresses that later job search. Knowing that having even a single internship during college reduces your risk of underemployment, read the Starbucks barista, reduces that risk by more than 40%. So when I'm hoping that more students will enter their college career thinking, this is a great opportunity for me to get to know myself, right? To have 4 years in basic isolation where I'm protected and I can grow as a human and I can mature, right? My brain can continue to develop. I can build relationships. I can develop really so much of what will become the grown-up me. But let's not forget the other reason we go to college is to prepare to become contributing adults, to prepare for a job. And I think that's gotten lost a little bit. And I'm hoping to help people start thinking about strategically, what could my college career look like that will reduce the stress when I'm a junior and senior?
Yeah, I'm torn in that vein between the luxury and the gift of getting an intellectually based education that serves no practical purpose versus the career path education, which may not give you the human skills to live a full life. And there's got to be some blend in there, and I'm constantly searching for what it is. But and
I think that blend is really important. You need to enjoy your college experience, and grow up and grow, right, and learn so much on your own. You're away from the home very often, right? But also, let's be practical and strategic at the same time. You mentioned Northeastern. I know a number of students who graduated from Northeastern. They're doing it right. The externships, the employers, particularly for majors like engineering, but the employers know exactly what they're getting. And they may already have a job offer by the time they leave their sophomore year.
My daughter has quite often said during the past year, even before graduation, it's like she really wished her senior year had been basically living skills and a lot more direct career counseling. Well, one more thing before we get on to the passive thing. You mentioned the underemployment because you had that statistic that was really scary about how many kids end up with a college degree, but then don't get a job that requires a college degree, and then what happens when they get stuck.
Yes. So you can Google it. It's called Talent Disrupted, a very major study that came out in February of this year that concluded that 52% of recent college graduates have taken jobs that don't require their degree.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because they are not presenting what the employers say they need. And so much of that is the soft skills that I focus a lot on. It's on how you present yourself. What's the story you're telling in your resume? And then in the interview, what's your personal narrative that makes it clear to me you're the right person for this job? How did you get here? And what makes you memorable? So personal anecdotes, people are shocked by this. I saw jaws drop when I presented to a group of students. I said, I'm 56 years old. I've had a professional career well over 30 years. The item on my resume that is most commented on or asked about is something I did when I was 18 years old. Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
So people see that and they say, I know what I'm getting.
Yeah.
And they think, wow, that's like a scratch golfer.
Yeah.
Wow, that's something. And I know you're focused, when you're in high school, you're focused on leadership and skill building and community rather than just, hanging around with your friends. That's what I mean about building a personal narrative, helping me get to know you. What kind of values did you have when you grew up in your household, right? Where did you grow up? I talk to international students, like, you need to tell them you grew up in a village in India, and your whole goal is to be able to have a successful career where you can help the family back home. So you are super driven and self-motivated, given how far you've come and what you've been able to accomplish already. They have every reason to expect you're going to keep going. So that's why the soft skills are so important. The hard skills are going to show up on the resume and we can tease them out, but it's the soft skills and how to address the grown-up community, how to talk in professional terms, and how to showcase, given how many applicants are there for every job, what sets you apart.
Yeah.
And we can accelerate that process, but that process is right now, it's not as natural as we would like because of the way the culture and technology have changed.
So you said that also the scary thing is that if you end up taking that job as a barista, that maybe is a year long or whatever, that there's less of a chance that you're ever going to get back on the career track unless you maybe go on to graduate school or do something else.
That's right.
Big a problem is that, or how scared should parents be of letting their child take that fairly well-paid part-time job for fear that it derails them completely?
That is such a wonderful question for parents, and it's a real struggle, right? We want to send the right messages to our children. We can't have you as a freeloader after you've already graduated, but we need to support you and think strategically about what's going to help you the most. As I said, I think what will help most kids, if the money is not the most important need at the time, if it is, there's nothing you can do about that. They require some resilience and go find a job anyway. The career anyway, while you're working as a barista. There's nothing wrong with making money. It's a good thing, right? And it builds some skills and some independence, but the risk is very real. So more than 80% of those who found themselves in that position in their first year of underemployed are still there in their 10th year.
Wow. That is really
because it's so competitive. Yes, there's the odd case where somebody says, I don't care that you've been doing something else for the past year. I know how tough it is, or 2 years, but I like you. I'm going to hire you. And that's wonderful. That's what I was saying originally. I love the idea of actually looking at candidates instead of just ticking boxes from their resume, getting to know the people. But the world isn't making time for that with the hundreds of applicants, right? But I don't want to scare parents or students. What I want them to do is get started earlier, so it's not a problem. Yeah. Have the conversation earlier about not what mom and dad want you to do. What do you want to do? What do you think you want to do? You can't know necessarily, although you might. But what are you good at? What are you better at than most of the people you know, right? What Dan Sullivan calls your unique ability. What is your unique ability? And how can we put that forward? And how can we align that with a career path? That's the best starting point. And the earlier you do it, late in high school, freshman year in college, Then they're planning along those lines, the courses that they take, the internships they apply for. Once you've got that career-focused internship on your resume, you have leapfrogged so many of these problems. So that's why I like to help students focus early, because in the most competitive industries like finance, for example, those big coveted internships between junior and senior year at the big banks, the thousands and thousands of applicants, 20,000, I think, last year for this one bank. Those are you have a very good chance of being a walk into the full-time job after that internship. Let's say half do that. But because it's so competitive now, and now it's not just the banks doing it, it's the IT companies, it's the tech companies competing for the same pool. So how did the big companies respond? They all want to be ahead of the others. So they're going earlier and earlier. They're coming backwards. So by the time you're 19, you need to be road ready for a finance job.
Wow.
At one of these top institutions. That's absurd.
Yeah,
it's not realistic. It's not fair, but that's the world.
Yeah.
So I want them to start thinking earlier so they don't get caught behind later.
Well, then the other thing I wanted to talk about was about, well, the passive nature of job search today is the way we put out you throw in a resume and it goes out there into the world. And then a lot of kids just say, well, I'm used to texting or whatever. You text and then you wait and then, you go on. And that's not the way the world works in most cases. There's employers are looking for follow-up. They're looking for people who are motivated, who are really interested. How do you deal with that dichotomy of the way the system works, whereas you're throwing it into a void, quite often you don't even know who the hiring manager is, and there's not a way to follow up. And then also your cultural experience is usually just waiting for the next sign.
Yeah. And when I had, junior colleagues working for me, they would respond very similar to what you just described. I said, oh, did you ever, address this issue? Yeah, I wrote someone an email. And then I haven't heard back. There's your word. There's passive. I don't know. Use the phone. This is a phone on your desk. Pick up the phone and call them. Or better yet, if you know where they sit, walk over to their desk, right? So that immediate follow-up, that engagement is so, so important. In the case of, as you said, this kind of anonymous application process, unfortunately, it's going both ways, and companies are sending the wrong signal to the young applicants because they're not responding either. And I'm not a fan of ghosting. I think it's unfortunately become almost imperative because there's so many applicants and they don't have large enough teams. But now this can be automated. If I'm not on your list for an interview, literally send those 400 people an automated message. And some companies do that, to their credit. Despite all of your incredible experiences, we've decided to go in a different direction. We wish you the best of luck. I used to get those emails. I appreciate those. So, it's not surprising that there's a cynicism going into it, and that the young, job applicants are thinking, I put it in, right? They're not replying to me. I don't know what I can do. Well, the short answer to what you can do does require a little bit more of that motivation and that get up and go, which is the networking. So let's say you're targeting 3 companies that you'd really like to work for. Search the alumni network, see if they're in there. See who your parents might know or your parents' friends might know who might work at one of those companies. And you're not asking them to give you a job. This is the important thing. You're just asking them to say, hey, did you happen to see so-and-so's resume? And if that can even increase the chance that your resume floats up by a small percentage, it's worth doing, right? So that the networking is so, so, so important. And that does require some motivation. It requires being organized. You can create a template for yourself. This is my cold call networking message on LinkedIn. Very short, to the point. I'm hoping for a phone call. And then just be disciplined. One of the gentlemen I've been working with most of this year, who's doing fabulously well, had an incredibly well compensated summer internship that looks like it's going to roll into a full-time job. At one point, after we did all of our work together, we got that candidate profile exactly where we needed it. He LinkedIn messaged 200 people and he got tons of responses, in part because he's a special person, but also because he was very focused on what he was asking them for. And also his resume was very clear, right? There was it's not just things dumped on the resume. It's a very clear story that leads to this. And it's that law of large numbers, it's shots on goal. It matters so much more in this passive hiring world than it ever did before. And so do unfortunately, those keywords, right? Whether you use the word cloud generator or ChatGPT to help you, or you just do it passively yourself. I can see in this job description, they're emphasizing these skills. Well, doesn't it make sense for my resume to emphasize those skills if I really want this job? It's kind of that simple. But for the young people who feel a little bit lost and they're starting to get demotivated because nothing is happening, it's just about believing that they can do it. And that's, there's a lot of counselor and coach in here in terms of the only successful job search is one that you believe will end well, because nothing comes across the screen more than anxiety and fear and desperation. So you've graduated from college. That used to be enough. Well, believe it's enough for you to find something. Believe it's enough of a launch pad for you to then craft the right resume, write the proper cover letters, short and sweet, do the networking. How many jobs does any one graduate need? Just one. So believe that you can do it. For your daughter, sounds like she's doing the right thing. She's getting the skills rather than focused on the paycheck. I just put out a post maybe last week saying what you learn in your first job is much more important than what you earn. And I really do believe
this is
that.
a lot of really good information here, Chris. This sounds like a good place to stop, since we've covered so much in here, and I think there's just a wealth of information. I know you can find your coaching service as Guided Ascent Coaching. I think you've got a downloadable there also that's free.
Yes, a free download. I have for situations like this, I have a much more memorable way to find me on the web.
Okay.
It's jobreadygrads.com.
Jobreadygrads.com.
And like I said, I encourage young people to follow me on like Instagram. I've started posting there. LinkedIn. I'm posting regular content that is just free advice to improve your job searching prospects.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll put that in the show notes. Curtis, thank you so much for this. This is so helpful, I think, to a lot of people who are in the same situation. I've learned a lot. Generationally, I just think it's a completely different world. Myself, I've invested a lot of mental energy in learning about AI, and it astounds me every day the lack of imagination a lot of people have about AI, and how many people of all ages have not a clue. So this is like the early days of the internet. I was in the internet back in 1992. And
wow.
It's clearly, if you are in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. If you can get that training, I think that's one of the many good pieces of advice that we've learned today.
Terrific, Paul. It's really been a pleasure.
Okay. So Curtis Butler at Guided Ascent Coaching, look him up. I think this is, if you can afford a coach, well, certainly as a coach, I believe in coaching for everything, but this is one of those cases where it's a gift you can give to your kids. I really recommend it. Okay, Paul Baines with GreatDad.com. You can find my coaching services at GreatDad.com/go, with a bunch of other different resources, including my weekly groups on men finding meaning after 55, parents of biracial kids, and finding more resilience. So until next time, stay strong.